Therese, like this, is that enough?
No, I think, how about there, would that work? Hello. And afterwards then, do I sit here and you sit with me?
Yes, I'm going to, for the Q&A, I'm going to sit with you.
Okay. Oh, the light's gone out.
To je pro tebe.
Opravdu? Jiří, ale víš, že je to u tebe pozornost?
Ano, je.
Překvapení?
Dalo by se to tak říct.
Jiří, víš, že jsem dojel?
Ano, vím.
Mohu?
Musíš.
Já jsem tak napjatý.
Ano, si.
Tak to jsi nemusel.
Taková malá pozornost.
Dobrý večer, dámy a pánové. Vítám vás na Měsíci autorského čtení opět a tento večer si představíme Theresu Breslin, která je spisovatelkou, píše knihy pro děti a mládež, už jich napsala více než 30 a řada z nich už byla zfilmována, jak pro televizi, tak byla také převedena do rozhlasové verze. Velice se zajímá o dětskou literaturu a snaží se podporovat dětskou gramotnost, jak jen může. Také byla oceněna literární cenou Carnegie Medal za knihu Whispers in the Graveyard, která je o dyslektickém chlapci. Narodila se v malém městě uprostřed Skotska, v prostředí, kde je spousta hradů a kde je Hadriánův val a kde je spousta starých hřbitovů. A sama říká, že jí to ovlivnilo až i dnes její tvorbu. Tak přivítejte prosím Theresu Breslin.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. Particular thanks to Renata, who's organised this and emailed me several times to set it up.
Tak děkuji vám, děkuji za představení a děkuji za pozvání, zejména Renátě, která to všechno zorganizovala.
When I was born in a very small town in the centre of Scotland called Kirkintilloch, which means in Gaelic, ancient Celtic language, Coip an Tullach, the fort on the hill.
Rodila jsem se v malém skotském městě Kirkintilloch, které v galštině, ve staré skotské řeči, znamená pevnost na kopci.
And there was a fort, it was a Roman fort, and then afterwards it was a castle of King Robert the Bruce. And when I was young, I used to walk through the park and imagine I could see the soldiers, the Roman soldiers, and could see the knights jousting and the ladies in their dresses, looking very pretty.
A býval to tvrz a býval to také hrad, ve kterém žil král Robert Bruce. A když jsem byla malá, tak jsem se ráda procházela zahradami a pozemky, které k tomu hradu přiléhaly. A představovala jsem si, že tam vidím rytíře a dámy v dlouhých šatech a všechny ty lidé, kteří tam kdysi bydlívali.
It wasn't really a surprise to me that I could, told stories because I knew I had a good imagination, but it was a bit of a surprise that I became a writer and a published writer.
Nebylo pro mě velkým překvapením, že mohu vyprávět příběhy, protože jsem věděla vždy, že mám bujarou představivost, ale přišlo trochu jako překvapení to, že mohu psát a že jsem se stala spisovatelkou, dokonce spisovatelkou, kterou publikovali.
And I do books that range from picture books to modern books and also historical novels.
A píšu mnoho různých druhů knih, od knih pro nejmladší děti ilustrovaných leporel po knihy pro dospělé a historické romány.
From the Middle Ages, Catherine of Medici, Nostradamus, Christopher Columbus, Isabella of Spain, the Inquisition, to the Renaissance, Lucrezia Borgia, and Leonardo da Vinci.
Od dob středověku, například Nostradamus, Kristýnu Medici, do dob renesance a dále.
From I was very small, Da Vinci fascinated me. I saw his drawings of the child in the womb. I saw his designs for flight and his intricate details of plants.
Leonardo da Vinci zejména mě vždy velice fascinoval. Už od mala jsem vydávala jeho obrázky, jeho ilustrace dítěte v děloze a ilustrace různých strojů.
But also at that time in Italy was the infamous Cesare Borgia, the Borgia family. And Da Vinci at one point worked for him.
Nicméně v té samé době vládli v Itálii Borgiové a Leonardo pro ně jednu dobu pracoval.
It's relatively undocumented. There's very little notes or information about it, so I thought that's the perfect place to put my story.
Moc se o tom neví, neexistuje příliš mnoho důkazů, není žádná dokumentace. A tak jsem si říkala, že by tahle doba byla ideálním místem, kam posadit svůj příběh.
I'm going to read from the book. I'm going to read two linked extracts, one from the beginning of the book and then one from later on in the book.
Přečtu dvě ukázky, jednu ze začátku knihy a potom jednu z trochu pozdější části.
Could I just check, is that the author's note that's up there at the top? Does that, Italy at the time of the Renaissance? Is that how that starts? Okay. So this is the author's note to just give you a little bit of the background of the situation in Italy at that time.
Úplně ten první odstavec je taková poznámka spisovatele, aby si čtenář alespoň trošku uvědomil, co se v té době v renesanční Itálii dělo.
Italy at the time of the Renaissance did not exist as a single distinct country. The peninsula was comprised of various city-states in different regions, with the Kingdom of Naples in the south. This Kingdom of Naples was claimed by France and Spain, which meant that the armies of both these countries occupied Italian territory. On the northern border, the mighty Republic of Venice also sought new conquests. In addition to spiritual matters, the Pope had temporal powers and authority over a central area which included the Romagna. Within the Italian city-states, wealthy and influential families held control, one of the foremost being the Medici of Florence. The Medici patronage, particularly that of Lorenzo the Magnificent, nourished a splendid epoch of art and culture. But when Lorenzo died, it was only a few years later, in 1494, that the Medici were banished from Florence. So this story begins in the Romagna in the summer of 1502. The first blow struck the side of my head, and I stagger, almost falling to the ground. Sandino moves forward, stepping over the man lying dead at his feet, the man I saw him murder. Now he means to kill me. I stumble back. He thrusts out his cudgel, jabbing it hard into my gut. Doubled up, I scrabble onto the rocks away from him. He grunts in annoyance and follows. I glance around desperately, only the river behind and below me rushing in full flood. Sandino grins. No escape for you, boy. He raises his arm, he swings his cudgel again, and I jerk my head away to avoid his next blow, and my feet slip on the wet surface, and he shouts a curse, and I am falling. The sudden shock of cold water, and the river has me. The current batters my body, grabbing at my clothes, dragging my legs. I swallow great lumps of water, but I force my head to the surface and try to swim. My flailing is useless against the strength of the flow as it hurtles me onwards in its greedy grasp. I must try to reach one side of the riverbank, I must. But I'm weakening, unable to keep my head up. Then a sound fills me with terror, a waterfall. The noise becomes louder, the water swifter. I am seconds from death. With one last effort, I throw up my arms and scream for help. and I'm flung over the waterfall and slammed down into the foaming, broiling torrent. A thundering mass of churning water pounds at me, driving me under. Caught in the whirlpool, I cannot break free of its deadly force. My face is upturned, mouth stretched wide, desperately gasping for air. The falling water distorts my vision, a shattered rainbow. Beyond it is light and life. My eyes roll back, blood roaring in my brain. And now I seem to see myself from a great height, as though my mind views my body from another plane, removed from this earth to a different place. I look down and watch the frantic, dying struggles of a 10-year-old boy. Clawing, breath, none now, splintered light and utter darkness. Two hands grasp my head. I see nothing. I hear no sound. No smell enters my nostrils. But touch, yes. Long fingers under my chin and firmly across my brow, and a mouth gently over mine, covering my lips with his own, completely breathing life into me with his kiss. My lids open up. The face of a man looks down on me. I'm Leonardo da Vinci, the man says. My companions pulled you from the river. He tucks the folds of a cloak around me. I blink. The colour of the sky sears my eyes cold and painfully blue. What is your name? He asks. Matteo, I whisper. Matteo. His voice curls around each syllable. That is a fine name. The features of his face blur. I cough, vomiting water and blood. I'm going to die, I say, and begin to cry. He wipes my cheek with his hand. No, he replies. You're going to live, Matteo. He calls me Matteo. This is because when he rescued me from under the waterfall, almost half drowned, I had enough wit not to give him my real name, and Matteo was the first one that came to hand. Like the name, almost everything else I told him about me after was a lie. On the day of my rescue, they made a little campfire there, he with his two companions beside the waterfall, to try to dry me off. I would have liked to put as much distance as possible between myself and the place, but I had no choice. My head was cracked from Sandino's blow, and I could scarcely stand, let alone walk away. They wrapped me in a fur-lined cloak and laid me near the fire they had built. It was late summer. The weather was not very cold, but the days were growing shorter, and the sun swung lower in the sky. Zingaro, the fatter of his two companions, spoke their word for gypsy as he put kindling on the fire. I closed my eyes as the one called Leonardo glanced in my direction. He has a look of those people, and yet... The third man, whose cloak I was lying on, shook his head. It could be that he's one of a group travelling north. The nomads have been now banned from entering Milan, accused of all sorts of theft and chicanery. There's a gypsy encampment at Bologna, said the fat man. That's not so far from here. I tensed as I heard them say this. Bologna was where my people would settle to pass this winter. If these men thought me gypsy, then they might decide to take me to them. If that happened, then I would be recognised, welcomed and brought in, but I did not want to go to Bologna. It would be one of the first places that the brigand Sandino would look for me if he thought there was a chance I was still alive. Indeed, he might have already sent someone ahead on the road to catch me in case I sought refuge there. He would surmise I'd nowhere else to go, so some of his own vile men would be dispatched with instructions to bring me to him, their leader, if I appeared. I shivered as I recalled the blow Sandino's great cudgel had struck me, which had caused me to fall into the river and be swept away. The man, Leonardo, who had breathed on me to force water from my lungs, said, "The boy is small-formed, but then that might be due to malnutrition. It will become clear soon enough he is one of those prescribed when we listen to what he says when he awakens." I knew then not to tell them my origin. They might be sympathetic to a drowning boy, but their minds were already set against my race. Travelling people are known in many lands. We have a reputation as good farriers, skilled basket weavers, and metal workers, and the gift of being able to foretell the future. This latter talent is suspect, but if requested with payment to tell a person's destiny, then a gypsy, like anyone else, can make a fair guess as to what that person's future might bring. My grandmother was very good at it. She practiced the art of conversation so that anyone who spoke to her soon found that they had told her much more about themselves than they imagined. Then she would fit her advice to the situation as a tailor cuts cloth to suit the customer. But my grandmother was a true healer. She understood sickness of the body and of the spirit. Often, it was the ache of humanity that troubled people. Unrequited love, loneliness, the fear of growing old. Many came to her for her remedies. It was not mystical insight that allowed her to discern what ailed a person, but simple observation as straightforward as studying the sky to predict the weather or the trees to tell the season of the year. One only had to look with attention and interpret what one saw. A person whose eyes were tinged with yellow had sickness of the liver or the kidneys and needed an infusion of parsley herb to purify the blood. For someone showing sleeplessness and anxiety, she recommended chamomile for relaxation and the milky juice extracted from the lettuce as a sedative. She could tell if a woman was barren by the condition of her neck. Dry skin gathered there or folded wrinkles, indicating an empty womb. The woman would be in awe of my grandmother, who knew her request without being told, and would go away with new hope, hoping a purge made from rue and juniper berries to clear the pathways to the womb. Young girls often wanted a means to tell the identity of their true love. They were given stalks of yarrow to place under their pillow and some words to recite before going to sleep. By the feet of Venus thou dost grow, O herb whose true name is yarrow, let me dream of my love ere I wake tomorrow. My grandmother knew all these things and many more secrets of country lore. She also knew the time of her own dying. This was not because she had second sight, more that she had knowledge of how the heart should beat and became aware that hers was becoming weaker. These divinations are not magical and do not require any special gift, that is, unless the absence of stupidity is deemed a gift. But such skill arouses jealousy in others, and this was why we could never rest in one place for long. The town guilds and other businessmen did not like any kind of competition, and such is the prejudice against us that without even having been convicted or accused of any wrong, being gypsy alone can mean death. So I decided that I would lie. I began to prepare a story to tell my rescuers as I watched them from under half-closed lids. They certainly weren't mercenaries, for they carried no arms. Their horses were of fine stock with sturdy haunches rather than for show, built for covering distances more than for speed. No hunting equipment was attached to their saddles. Their food consisted of basic items: cheese, bread, fruit, wine. I deduced that they must travel each day and rest in accommodation of some kind by night. I tried to puzzle the purpose of their journey. The saddlebags were bulky, but not with goods or cloth. It was books and papers they held. But these three men were neither merchants nor traders, and between them rank did not seem to matter much. They were at ease in each other's company, yet they deferred to the man Leonardo da Vinci, he who had pronounced my name so carefully. From the beginning I called him Maestro. I was corrected later by one of his companions to use the term Messer, which in some ways is of greater status, but at that time he interrupted and said, "If it pleases the boy to call me Maestro, then so be it. Let him call me Maestro if he wishes. In my mind, he's always Maestro." It was past midday, and they warmed themselves by the fire and took out food to eat. The fat one, who was called Graziano, saw that I was awake and offered me some food. I shrank back. The maestro stopped eating, held out his hand, and told me to come nearer. I shook my head. "Then we will wait until you do." He set his food aside and took up a book. I watched to see what would happen. No one disturbed him. His two friends talked quietly as he read. Their food lay on the grass. I was very hungry. The chill from the water had entered my bones, so I came to the fire and sat down. The maestro put down his book and handed me a piece of bread. We eat together in this household, he said. I looked around at his companions. They chatted with each other, passing food and drink to me as if I were an equal. We should move on, Graziano said, if we're to reach our destination before nightfall. Is your family home near here? The maestro asked me. I do not have a family. I am an orphan. I worked as a stable boy when I can get work or with the harvest. I had the sentences ready to reply at once. Where is your place of work? Surely they'll be looking for you now that it's getting dark. I shook my head. No, they will think I've moved on. And that is what I was doing, I added quickly. They kicked me and beat me and didn't give me enough food, so I will go and find another place to work now. Yes, the thinner man said, it's obvious that you've not eaten in a while. He laughed and indicated the large amount of bread I had consumed. I flushed and dropped a piece in my hand. Hush, Filippi, his master chided him. The boy is hungry. The maestro picked it up and gave it back to me. Filippi is making a joke, he said. A boy like that is always hungry, said Filippi gloomily. I was to find out later that Filippi was responsible for buying supplies and food, and it required all his accounting skills to ensure that the maestro and the rest of his entourage could work and live with sufficiency. Do you want to travel with us to our next stop? The maestro asked me as they made ready to go. Where is that? We cross at the bridge downstream and go back up country on the other side to a place called Perella. I tried to think of what Sandino might be doing at this moment. He would want to find me, not that he cared whether I drowned or not, but for another reason altogether. I had something he desired, a precious object that he'd deceived me into stealing for him. Months ago, he'd turned up at the gypsy camp where I was living after my grandmother's funeral. From my earliest memory, my grandmother and I had travelled the roads together by ourselves, my mother having died when I was a baby, and my father being unknown. Mostly we kept separate from any other band of gypsies until my grandmother, realising that she was very ill, took her wagon to a camp north of Bologna so that I would not be on my own when she died. Sandino claimed some kind of kinship with my grandmother, and she, being dead, could not agree or disagree. I went with him because he promised me the life of a pirate, and I'd been enchanted with the idea of sailing across this ocean. To be a buccaneer, as he described, appealed to me. But taking me on a ship was not his true intention. Sandino had heard of my dexterity in opening locks, and he, in the pay of others, had a murderous plan which required my skills. I was the person he thought could help him, and in part I had. Except I had not handed over the thing I had stolen on his behalf. I still carried it with me. So I feared that Sandino would follow the river downstream to try to retrieve it from my body, dead or alive. I had no way of knowing how far I had come. The river had been swift-moving, swollen and flooded with rain. I guess it had taken me several miles. Sandino and his men did not have horses and would therefore have to walk. Also, he would spend time searching for my body along the banks. Hopefully, he'd think I'd been swept into the sea or was caught in reeds somewhere, being eaten by eels. Even if he suspected I'd survived, if I crossed over and went back upstream with these men to the village of Perella, Sandino would not think I'd gone that way, back in the direction I'd come from. My rescuers had horses, which meant I would travel faster. I decided that I would go with them and then run off when it was safe to do so. We should be at Perella before dark, said Graziano. We're lodging at the castle there, Filippi addressed me. It's likely they would feed a boy who could help in the stables. The maestro reached out and put his hand on my forehead. His fingers were finely tapered, his touch gentle. You're still stunned from the knock on your head. I think we should carry you with us on one of our horses and take you there. Yes, Matteo? I nodded. Will the Borgia be there to speak to you? Filippi asked him. The maestro shrugged. Who knows where Il Valentino is or will be? Isn't that one of the features he has as a military commander? No one knows his exact location. He strikes like a snake and then is gone to reappear somewhere else when least expected. It was the first time I'd heard them mention Prince Cesare Borgia, known as Il Valentino, although I was familiar with the name, who was not. The Borgia family was known throughout Europe. Rodrigo Borgia sat on the throne of St. Peter and ruled the church as Pope Alexander VI. this wicked man with his bastard children, the infamous Cesare and Lucrezia, meant to bring all Italy under their dominion. His daughter Lucrezia, fair-haired and beautiful, was recently wed to the Duke of Ferrara, and I had seen the Borgia marriage celebrated in the spring of this year in Ferrara when I had been going about Sandino's business. Her wedding had provided an entertainment for the citizens and spectators, although not all of them were kindly disposed towards her. The bride being regarded by many of the Ferrarese as a deceitful woman whose father, the Pope, had paid their Duke Ercole a fast dowry to marry her to his eldest son, Alfonso. I'd heard murmurs and catcalls on the day of her wedding as I moved through the crowd. One woman commented on the shield given by the King of France to Alfonso as a wedding gift, saying, "The Duke's new shield portrays an image of Mary Magdalene. Was she not also a loose woman?" Many people in the woman's vicinity laughed, though some looked nervously over their shoulders to see if anyone had noted what they'd said about the House of Borgia. The revenge of the Borgia to those who offended their family was terrible, but the mood of the crowd was festive, and the quips continued. As the procession passed to the great cathedral for the marriage ceremony, a loud whisper echoed in the piazza. "Let the groom pray well that he might live longer than our previous husband, strangled on the command of our own brother." So I discovered that these men who had rescued me and with whom I had agreed to travel had some connection to Cesare Borgia. But I reckoned that, at the moment, this might be more help to me than harm. We crossed the river at a little stone bridge and turned towards Parella. It was a popular crossing place, and many horses had trampled the path between the river and the road. The maestro had placed me on his saddle in front of him. I was still bundled up in Filippi's cloak and kept my face hidden as he showed the bridge keeper the pass he carried, signed by the hand of the Borgia himself. By the time we reached the village of Parella, I had time to think more of Sandino and what he might do. I thought now that I should not run away at the first opportunity. In addition to covering Bologna, Sandino would also have spies on the main roads around this area. But he knew that I had discovered that the Borgia family paid him to do their evil work. If these men, my rescuers, were to be lodged in the castle at Parella, then, for a short time at least, remaining with them was the safest thing for me to do. Parella, a Borgia stronghold, would be the last place Sandino would expect for me to seek shelter. He would not look for me there. This is what I truly believed. So that is the end of the first section that I was going to read. And just to link the two sections, I was going to say a few words about the story, which Barbara's going to translate for me.
Toto je konec první části a abyste měli nějaké spojítko mezi první a druhou částí, tak o tom řeknu jenom pár slov, o tom se stalo mezi tím.
One of the great joys of doing writing a historical book is doing research.
Jedna z nejzajímavějších věcí na psaní historických románů je to, že se o tom dozvídáte, hledáte si informace o tom období.
And I can't say I find it a sacrifice to leave Scotland in the winter and stay for a few weeks in Italy.
A nemohu říct, že by to bylo nějaká zvláštní oběť pro mě opustit v zimě Skotsko a strávit 2 týdny v Itálii.
And I was there, and I had been, as you know, I'd been studying Da Vinci's drawings, etc. And I'm just going to, this actually happened to me when I was there, so I'm just going to demonstrate it, and you'll understand probably, if you know anything about Da Vinci, what was in my mind when this happened.
Už jsem zmiňovala, že jsem se hodně dívala na Leonardovy obrázky, ilustrace, a pokud o něm něco víte, něco málo, tak to, co teďka budu popisovat, asi budete vědět, o čem mluvím.
This is the seed of the sycamore tree.
Tohle je semínko javoru, klen.
And I don't know what you call them here, but I can tell you in a minute what we call them in Scotland. And I was sitting in a cafe, and this fell from the sky.
Tak nevím, jak jim říkáte v Čechách, ale hned vám řeknu, jak jim říkáme ve Skotsku. A seděla jsem v kavárně a najednou se stalo tohleto.
So can you see what happens?
Vidíte to?
Did you see? Will I do it again? It spins as it goes down, and I just thought someone like Da Vinci, that must have happened. He must have seen that because Italy was so densely wooded at the time.
Točí se, rotuje a mě napadlo, že Leonardo tohle také musel vidět, protože v době, kdy žil, byla ještě Itálie plná stromů.
And I thought he would see that, and of course, he would wonder why, when a normal leaf falls completely differently.
Já jsem věděla, že to uviděl a že určitě ho napadne, proč se to tak děje, když obyčejný list padá úplně jiným způsobem.
And the reason I'm telling you that is I just thought it might be, it's on page, it's woven into the book on page 244.
A říkala jsem si, že vám o tom řeknu, protože na to odkazuju na straně 244.
if you want to read it. So the group travel to Perella and they meet Captain Delorte, who commands the castle there, and his family, his wife, 2 sons and 2 daughters.
Skupina dojela do Perely a setkala se s Borgii, kteří tomu tam velí, s rodinou toho velitele, s jeho dcerami a syny.
And Matteo becomes very friendly with them. They treat him as one of the family, which, and surround him with love, which is missing in his life.
A Matea se tam velice oblíbí. Chovají se k němu jako členu rodiny a on je obklopený láskou, což je něco, co mu do té doby v životě hodně scházelo.
But Da Vinci knows there is something different about the boy. When they met, he noticed him doing something, and he understands that he's lying, and he's intrigued by this.
Leonardo ale ví, že na chlapci něco nehraje, protože když se setkali, tak si všiml, že se chová trošku podezřele a ví teda, že lže a zajímá ho, co zatím vlastně všechno je.
He takes the boy into his household and he becomes his apprentice to mix paints and as his almost like his servant.
Vezme chlapce k sobě a vezme ho do učení, aby mu míchal barvy a podobně. Víceméně se stane takovým sluhou.
Meanwhile, Cesare Borgia is capturing city by city, and when he does that, he leaves one of his captains in charge in his absence.
Mezitím Cesare Borgio odjede, aby obléhal město a nechá jednoho ze svých kapitánů na té tvrzi, aby na to dozírali.
But then he finds out that some of his captains are plotting against him. Instead of keeping the city safe for him, they intend to keep them for themselves.
Nicméně pak se dozví, že jeho kapitáni místo toho, aby mu to město, které dobil, tak aby ho chránili, tak se snaží proti němu vést intriky a získat ho sami pro sebe.
One of these captains, Vittorio Vitellezzo, is a friend of Leonardo da Vinci.
Jeden z těchto kapitánů se přátelí s Leonardem.
They don't realize that Cesare Borgia has found out about their betrayal.
Neuvědomují si, že Cesare Borgia se o jejich zradě dozvěděl.
The Borgia makes his winter headquarters at Imola, and at Imola he summons Da Vinci to attend to him.
Borgia udělá zimní tábor v Emile a pozve Leonarda k sobě.
And Florence is terrified that the Borgia wants to capture them, so they send their best diplomat to speak to the Borgia. His name is Niccolo Machiavelli.
Florentiané se děsí toho, že se Borgia chystá oblehnout a dobít. A tak vyšlou jednou ze svých nejlepších diplomatů, aby si s ním o tom promluvil. A ten diplomat se jmenuje Niccolo Machiavelli.
And so these are all facts. And so in the winter 1502, in the castle of Imola, sitting down to dinner, is Leonardo da Vinci, Cesare Borgia and Niccolo Machiavelli.
Tohle všechno se opravdu stalo, takže v zimě roku 1502 na Imolském hradě se k večeři usazuje Leonardo, Cesare Borgia a Niccolo Machiavelli.
Can I be excused for 1 minute while I get a pair of glasses because the light is affecting my eyes? 1 minute.
Mě na okamžik omluvte, musím si vzít brýle kvůli světlu. Děkuji.
The eyes of Cesare Borgia flickered over his dinner guests. His gaze rested on me where I stood beside the maestro's chair. Do we need this boy here? He will fetch my sketches and plans should you require them, my lord, said the maestro. Matteo knows where everything is kept. The dinner began. I reached out, lifted my master's wine cup. Before I handed it to him, I drank from it. The maestro's eyes opened in surprise. You insult our host, he said in a low voice. We both looked to the top of the table. The Borgia had turned his head to listen to his dining companion. She was the wife of the lieutenant who arrived that morning and quite beautiful. She smiled at him coquettishly, and he laughed. His guests relaxed. I did not. Cesare Borgia ate heartily but drank little. Frequently he glanced around the table. He had the countenance of a man who had just entered a brothel. Dessert was announced with a trumpet fanfare, cherries soaked in liqueur flavoured with cocoa, a delicacy brought from the New World. It struck me then that as few people would have tasted this plant, it was a perfect opportunity to conceal poison. I bent and wiped the maestro's spoon with a napkin. I whispered in his ear, "Do not eat this dish." "Hush, Matteo." This plate was to be served to every individual separately, yet at once. Led by a drummer, a long procession of servants filed into the great hall. They each carried a single plate, and they positioned themselves, one behind each chair, preparatory to placing the dish before each guest. Across the table from the maestro sat the lieutenant. This man had displeased Cesare Borgia, and I remember how earlier in the afternoon Il Valentino had made much show to welcome him, embracing the lieutenant in the courtyard as he arrived at the head of his column of soldiers. But now the lieutenant's men were barracked some distance from the castle, and their commander sat alone at the table of the Borgia. My eyes met those of the servant who now stood behind his chair, and the breath in my chest thickened so that I could not breathe. This was no servant. It was Michelotto, personal henchman of Cesare Borgia. The Borgia stood up and made a signal, and opposite me, like the other servants, the Borgia henchman with both hands placed the dish down on the table over the lieutenant's head. The servants kept their hands on either side of the plate and waited. The guests at table made appropriate noises of delight at the unusual dish. Some of the ladies applauded. The lieutenant's wife scooped up a cherry and popped it into her mouth. "Delicious," she exclaimed. She tilted her head provocatively at Cesare Borgia. "You must try one." He smiled at her, but did not make any motion to eat. It was obvious that I was not the only one to have doubts about the strange dish, for although some people lifted their spoons, many hesitated. As if he had not noticed any awkwardness, Cesare Borgia sat down then, picked up his own spoon and dipped it in the dessert. He put a mouthful to his lips, but it wasn't until he had eaten that the rest of the company followed suit. The lieutenant took his spoon in his hand. The Borgia nodded and waved to his servants in a gesture of dismissal. Everyone's attention was on the table in front of them, everyone's except mine. On the opposite side of the table, I saw the Borgia executioner smile. He raised his hands as if to withdraw. Between his fingers, in the candlelight, gleamed the wire of a garrote. In a sudden, violent gesture, the lieutenant's hands clutched the table edge. A choking, gurgling noise retched from his throat. His fingers grabbed wildly, and his plate went spinning, and it fell to the floor and shattered. Michelotto tightened the torque. Unperturbed, Cesare Borgia continued talking to the lady at his side. She glanced down the table to see what had caused the disturbance. The Borgia smiled and leaned towards her. He whispered in her ear. She recoiled, and her hand went to her throat. And then she stood up and gave out a long scream, but she was too late to warn her husband, and it took several seconds for the rest of the guests to appreciate what was happening. The lieutenant kicked out as he tried to twist away. His chair toppled back as his attacker hauled in the garrote. The man's own weight was now helped strangle him. He reached up desperately, hands clawing at the face of his murderer. Then his struggles lessened. Michelotto gave one last pull and flung the man away from him. The body twitched and jerked upon the floor, shuddered and lay still. The lieutenant's face was black, with its swollen tongue protruding between his lips. Some of the guests rose from the table. Cesare Borgia snapped his fingers, and the soldiers of his personal guard ran into the room. Their swords were drawn. At once, all the dinner guests became motionless in their chairs. Those who had half risen sat down again. The maestro sank into his chair. He dropped his head onto his hands. Filippo went to him and began to help him to his feet. From the head of the table, Cesare Borgia spoke. "I gave no one permission to leave," he said sulkily. "All will sit until I say otherwise." He stood up and approached the lieutenant's wife, who was crying hysterically. He slapped the woman on the cheek. She stumbled to her chair and sat down, still weeping. Filippo faced the Borgia and spoke calmly. "My master is unwell. I pray by your leave, my lord, that he take his rest, so that he may serve you to the best of his ability tomorrow." Cesare Borgia gazed at Filippo for several seconds. Graziano had shoved his chair back from the table, but he had not risen. His eyes were on Filippo. I tensed myself. By an effort of will, I kept my hand away from the dinner knife lying on the table within my reach. I had already marked the soldiers by the door. Now I measured how many paces to the window. But I knew we had no chance of escape. If the Borgia chose to deem Filippo's request an insult, then none of us would leave the room alive. "Messer Leonardo," Cesare spoke slowly, "your work is valuable to me. Please go now and rest before your labors in the morning." He looked at Graziano, then Filippo, then me, as if memorizing our faces and our names, before he continued, "You may take the members of your household with you." Within a second, Graziano and Filippo were at either side of the maestro to help him stand. I picked up his bag. We retreated from the room as swiftly and unobtrusively as possible. After we left, I heard Cesare Borgia call out to his musicians. "Such gloom," he cried, "will not do during a holiday. Play us a merry tune, minstrels." He took the sobbing lieutenant's wife by the arm. "Perhaps now we will dance." That night, no one slept in the castle of Imola. My master did not eat, or read, or draw, or undertake any of his studies. He sat by the open window with a heavy cloak about his shoulders and stared at the night sky. Sometime before dawn, Niccolò Machiavelli came and spoke to Filippo for a while. He had written previously to the Council of Florence saying that he was in danger and asking to be recalled, but to no avail. "Perhaps now they will listen to me," he said. "I want to leave this place as soon as I am able. And I must try to disengage the maestro from the services of the Borgia," Filippo replied, "but how to do it safely?" "Cesare Borgia's mind is locked on one purpose," said Graziano, "and he will destroy anyone that stands in his way." "Because he has deemed it a worthwhile cause," said Machiavelli, "he believes he has a right to employ any method to achieve his aim." It's an interesting concept. "Has there been any more word about what his captains are scheming?" Filippo asked him. "I have my own men working for me," said Machiavelli, "and I recently received coded messages, but I fear these have already passed through the hands of the Borgia, so it may be that I only hear what he wishes I should hear." He shrugged. "For what is his worth, the French are sending troops to help him. I suspect he will wait until they are close and then offer reconciliation to the condottieri captains. They will not know that he has gathered more troops independently of them and may believe him to be trying to make peace because they outnumber him. He's planning to arrange a meeting with them to parley." "Not here, surely," said Filippo aghast. "They wouldn't be so stupid as to come into his den to be devoured." In the morning, we had definite news. Cesare Borgia would meet with his former captains to discuss terms, but not at Imola. It would be on their territory, in a place they had just captured and where their forces were stationed. We had to make ready for a journey. Within the hour, the Borgia, his men and retainers should leave for the coastal town of Senigallia on the Adriatic Sea. "Has every one of his captains agreed to this meeting?" the maestro asked Filippo as we set out. He was sitting beside me on a horse-drawn cart that carried his books and materials. Filippo and Graziano rode on their own horses beside him. Filippo nodded. Unspoken between them was the name of Vitellozzo Vitelli, the captain who was the maestro's friend. Flanked by 600 Swiss pikes, we rode in the train of the Borgia army down the Via Emilia. Snow was falling in the last days of that bitter December. The villages we passed through were deserted. I suspected the inhabitants flitted out at our approach and then returned after the army had gone. We stopped at Cesena, where they gave a ball in honour of Il Valentino, and he danced and flirted as if he had no other care in the world. But secretly, Machiavelli had told us that the Borgia forces had been split up and we had been sent ahead separately by different routes to converge in Senegalia. In the days before Christmas, Cesare Borgia feasted and listened to music. Yet still he exacted his revenge, for when his governor of the region, Ramiro de Lorca, came to join him in the celebrations, he had him arrested, and under torture the man confessed to being part of the plot. Thus, on Christmas morning, Ramiro de Lorca was beheaded in the main square and his body left for all to see. With this deed done, on the following day, the 26th of December, we set out for Senegalia. As a sign of good faith, Cesare Borgia asked that his former captains withdraw their troops from the citadel of Senegalia itself. They complied with his request. So on the last day of the year, we came to the river Misa, where these rebel condottieri captains came out to meet him. Beside me on the cart, the maestro groaned when he saw them approach. Graziano whispered to me, Vitelezzo is here, the master sees him. We watched anxiously as the two groups of horsemen met. But Cesare Borgia was a man transformed. He rode forward joyfully and hailed the watchful and suspicious captains. His eyes flashed with pleasure at seeing their faces, and he called their names individually. He leaned over in his saddle to embrace and hold each man to him as one would a friend not seen for many days. For their part, the captains seemed to relax. As far as they could discern, Cesare had not brought troops with him in any great number, and they appeared mesmerized by his show of charm and attention. The party prepared to go over the bridge into the Borgo before the town. I clicked the reins, but Filippi reached out and put his hand on my arm. He said nothing to me, but I pulled back and caused the animal to delay a little so that we lagged behind. I noted that Messer Machiavelli was doing the same. On the other side of the cart, Graziano moved his horse closer to protect the maestro. Machiavelli told us later that Il Valentino had already sent his spies into the town in great numbers to lock all the gates except the one by which he would enter. So now Cesare invited Vitellozzo and the rest of the captains to accompany him. As they crossed the river, the Borgia cavalry swung in from their position and lined up, guarding the bridge. We saw the captains glance around and murmur to each other. The procession entered Senegalia, accompanied only by troops under Cesare's command. A division of the Gascon infantry and his personal men-at-arms. Among these was Michelotto. We were with the last of the retinue. The gates shut behind us. And now his captain's unease congealed into real fear. They hastened to say farewell to their prince and overlord and return to their own troops outside the walls, but Cesare entreated them to wait and speak more with him. His utmost friendliness and congenial manner served to confuse them. He told them he had a house already marked out where they might confer. He urged them to come and discuss what arrangements needed to be made for the future. And he rode on, and they, like us, being pressed in by his escort, could not disagree. When we reached the villa, Cesare Borgia dismounted, and the captains had no choice but to do the same. Filippi and Graziano did not. Filippi gave me a significant look, and I, hoping I was reading his meaning correctly, began to maneuver our little cart back from the entrance. But the throng of the soldiers was too great. We were stuck fast in the crowd. Cesare strode into the courtyard. His captains tried to catch up with him. There was an outside staircase leading to an upper level of the house, and Cesare went across and began to ascend the stairs. The captains made to follow. But immediately, Michelotto and the Borgia men-at-arms seized him. There was barely a scuffle. So swiftly and firmly were these sorry men overcome, they did not even have time to draw their swords. The trap was sprung. "Wait!" One of his young captains called out to the Borgia. "I beg you," this youth cried out piteously, "my lord, allow us at least to speak with you." On the top step, Cesare paused for a moment. He looked down upon his enemies, then he turned away and went inside. The soldiers behind us surged forwards. Graziano and Filippi took firm hold of the cart horse bridle, and the maestro covered my hands with his own to tighten our grip on the reins, and we forced our way out of the melee and back towards the main gate. Ahead of us we saw Machiavelli, who cried out to us above the uproar, "To me! To me!" He led us round the inner wall of the town to another gate where he knew the men guarding it. His own spies, paid with Florentine money, no doubt. We went through without comment and came out by the riverside, where we found the place where the Borgia cavalry had made camp. And there we waited while his troops rampaged in the town, pulling citizens out of their beds and slaying any they thought had conspired against the Borgia. In the darkest watches of the night, Machiavelli slipped away to learn what news he could. He did not return until it was almost dawn. His face was grave. The condottieri captains had been bound and thrown into one of the lower rooms in the villa. In the early hours of the first day of the new year of 1503, Michelotto had strangled Vitellozzo and the young captain back to back upon a bench. Forgive me for bringing you this most dreadful news, Machiavelli said, but you should know that Il Valentino intends to ride out this morning in full battle dress at the head of his army. He will now go to Perugia and to the other towns that resist him. The rulers there are already fleeing before his wrath. The rest of these captured rebels he will bring with him as prisoners, but their fate will be the same. Felipe went to my master to tell him of the death of his friend. He did not return for an hour. The maestro is ill, he told us. He needs time to recover. We must try to make our way to Florence where he can recuperate. I will send a message to Il Valentino telling him this and hope that he's too concerned with his own vendetta to pursue us. Matteo, he turned to me. Can you make ready our horses? I went to where the horses were stabled in rough shelters against the cold. Hay had been put out for them, but the sound of the screams and the sights of the fire in the town had made them restless. They jostled and strained at their tether lines. I spoke to them and they quietened. I reached to unhitch the cart horse first and then stopped. Just beyond the trees, two men moved under the moonlight. They had features I recognized. One had been in the room when I'd first met the Borgia. The other was one of Sandino's men. I sank down on my knees. Beside me, the horse shifted and stamped and bent his head to nudge my shoulder. I laid my head upon its long nose and blew softly into its nostrils. Do not betray me, my friend, I spoke silently to the horse. My life depends on you. Their conversation came to me on the chill night air as they passed, and I heard a name mentioned. Perella. Perella? There, the boy was, weeks ago. And then, quite distinctly, one man said, already his men are riding to Perella. Sandino will go there as soon as he reports to the Borgia. He has vowed to burn the castle and everyone within it. My stomach knotted, and I thought I might vomit. Sandino intended to attack Perella. Felipe and Graziano came to meet me in the early light. I had both Graziano's and Felipe's horses saddled, and the shaft through the harness of the other one that pulled the cart. Well done, Matteo, said Graziano as he began to stack away our belongings. Felipe put down the box he carried. I will go and fetch the maestro, who said, we must get away before the camp stirs. I cannot go with you, I said. What nonsense is this? Felipe spoke sharply. Why ever would you wish to stay here, Matteo? Asked Graziano. I do not intend to stay here, I said. I must go to Perella. I overheard two Borgia men talking, and there is attack planned upon our friends in their keep. Felipe put his lantern against my face. Is this true? It is what I heard. Why would the Borgia do such a thing, said Graziano. Captain Dell'Orte is a loyal soldier. Yes, said Felipe, but even loyal soldiers can be foully murdered. He looked at me closely. How did you hear of this? I was by the horses and heard some men who had just ridden in, two of the Borgia spies, in conversation. It's good of you to want to go and warn them, said Graziano, but please do not try to stop me, I said. I could not explain to them, or even to myself, why I would want to ride into danger when it would be more sensible to run away from it. My one thought was to reach Perella before Sandino and warn Captain Dell'Orte. He had enough men and military experience to withstand an attack by Sandino and his brigands, but only if I warned him in time. You must use my horse, said Graziano. I will travel on the cart with our master. Felipe took my hand. He gave me some coins. Take these, he said. You may have need of money. I will tell the maestro what has happened. Graziano also put something into my hand. It was a long dagger. This may be of use to you. Before I left, Philippi said, "You will be welcome in the household if you decide to return. Do what you can." He cuffed me gently on the head. "I hope we meet again, Matteo." I led Graziana's horse quietly away. As soon as I was out of sight of any watcher, I mounted and set a course for Perella. Travelling as fast as I could, it took me until noon the next day to reach the place where the rivers met. I galloped across the bridge with the toll keeper shouting after me to pay my due. On up the hill to where the castle stood at the top. It was then that I saw the smoke rising into the air. I saw the great door smashed open. I saw that I was too late. Thank you. Did I sit here? Yes. Okay. What a lovely audience.
The micro is here.
Tak jo, tak první dotazy.
Hello.
Evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for your voice here. My questions. First, how we will vote about Scotland. Second, you and Moravian nation. And third, Scottish legends, which writer is maybe important to read about the roots of Scotland. The most, what is about what is important? Which writer is important? What is about oldest Scottish legends, or better to say, about legends about oldest times of Scotland? Takže krátce jenom 3 dotazy. Skotsko, referendum, Morava a skotské legendy. And if you maybe can tell us a little more about the place where you was born. Thanks.
The place where?
Where you were born.
Oh, where I was born. Well, how I'm voting at Scottish independence is my response to that question is that people died to give me a vote. In Britain, in previous centuries, you didn't have a vote if you were not very well off, and definitely if you were not a woman. And then it became that you did have a vote if you owned a business. And then more people got a vote, but the way that you voted is you had to go to the main square and you had to declare who you voted for. So it wasn't private. And that meant then that whoever employed you could sack you if you didn't vote the way they wanted to. So people have died, women have died, to give me a private vote as a woman. So I am keeping my vote private. To answer the second question, oh yes, you translate that first one.
Takhle můj názor na hlas ve skotském referendu je takový, že lidé zemřeli proto, abych já mohla volit. V Británii jste měli hlas jen když jste měli hodně peněz, rozhodně jste ale nesměli být žena, a pak jste měli hlas, když jste vlastnili nějaký obchod, když jste byli obchodníci. Ale fungovalo to tak, že jste přišli na nějaké náměstí a museli jste říct nahlas, pro koho budete hlasovat. A což znamenalo, že pokud se vašemu zaměstnavateli například nelíbilo, pro koho hlasujete, tak vás mohl vyhodit. Takže mnoho lidí, mnoho žen zemřelo proto, abych mohla hlasovat soukromně, měl ten jakoby tajný hlas, a já teda toho práva využiju a nechám si to, jak budu hlasovat pro sebe.
And the second question, I guess you're talking about this book, which is my latest book, The Illustrated Treasury of Scottish Folk Fairy Tales.
About what do you know about the Moravian nation?
Oh, sorry, I thought it was about old folk tales, no?
Yeah, it was the third one. There were
there were 3 questions. Oh, you're cheating, 3 questions. I know nothing. I'm sorry. I have just arrived in your beautiful country, and so I really have. I know nothing. I'm very pleased to be here. It is I'm very happy to have been invited. Mm-hmm. And will I go straight out of this?
Yes. Tak o moravském národě nevím nic, teprve jsem přijela a je to krásná země a jsem velice ráda, že jste mě pozvali a že tu jsem, ale nevím bohužel nic.
So when I was growing up in this very small town, we were a very large family, and we had family gatherings where people would tell stories, sometimes family stories, sometimes folk stories. And as a child, we would put on little plays with stories. And so this is a collection of folk and fairy tales. But yeah, they have a resonance. You know, the story of the wee bannock, which is a little kind of scone, is the gingerbread man that runs away. Wapiti story is Rapunzel. Rashi coat, the girl whose coat was made from rushes at the you know, from the side of the loch, is Cinderella. So these are retellings of traditional tales, but traditional tales have similarities the world over.
Když jsem vyrůstala jsem v malém městě a měli jsme obrovskou velkou rodinu. A když jsme byli malí, tak jsme se vyprávěli často příběhy, ať už se jednalo o rodinné příběhy nebo o folkové, o pohádky. A my jako děti jsme často dělali taková malá představení, ve kterých jsme ty příběhy vlastně jsme je hráli. A tato sbírka pohádek, která mi vyšla, tak je o skotských příbězích, ale víceméně to jsou pohádky, jak je znají všichni, akorát jsou převedené do Skotska, nebo používá se tam ta tradice, která je známá ve Skotsku. Takže například The Wee Bannock je vlastně pohádka o perníčku, tak jak ji známe my. Nebo Wapiti story.
Very good, yes, excellent, well done.
To je příběh o Rapunzele, nějaké znáte dívka tak dlouhými vlasy, že po nich pak princ vyšplhal nahoru do věže. A potom je tam ještě například příběh o dívce s šaty z rákosu, který rostl na březích Skotského jezera, a to je zase verze, tu, kterou my známe jako Popelku. Takže ty příběhy jsou podobné, ale tradice se trošku mění, bo to prostředí je jiné. Tak další dotaz. A bit about the city you grew up in.
Oh, it was a very small town. It was a very small town. And very boringly, we moved, when I got married, I moved away 1 mile to the next town. It's just about 12 miles northeast of Glasgow. It's sort of in the middle of Scotland. But Scotland is so small that you can reach the sea quite quickly, no matter. But there are hills round about, which is very nice. I like it. Do you know the expression home buddy? A home buddy, a person who likes to be at home. Though I like to travel, but it's lovely. It's a nice place.
Pocházím opravdu, mé rodné město je velice malé a byla tam celkem nuda. A po svatbě jsem se, jakmile jsem se vdala, jsem se odstěhovala, teda 1 míli do nedalekého města. A to městečko rodné tak leží 12 mil severovýchodně od Glasgow, přímo uprostřed Skotska. A je to nedaleko moře, akorát vlastně Skotsko je tak malé, že ať jste kdekoliv, tak se vám podaří dostat se k moři celkem rychle a je také obklopeno kopci. A já ráda žiju doma, takový domácký tvor, ale také ráda cestuji, takže tam mám tam velice ráda.
There's a small church that goes back to medieval times, so there are old buildings. And one of the books called Whispers in the Graveyard, the one that won the medal, was based on something that happened in the town. Do you want to hear this?
I'll ask you.
Do you want to hear it? About a graveyard?
V tom městečku je středověký kostel a je tam spousta starých domů a jedna z knih, právě ta, která byla oceněná, tak ta Whispers in the Graveyard, tak se tam právě odehrává, nebo je založena na něčem, co se tam stalo, na hřbitovním příběhu. A jaká je otázka, jestli o tom chcete slyšet?
Do you want to hear that? Yes. Okay. So I worked in a library and we did storytelling to the children. And one little girl loved the stories. I would tell the story like this. Once upon a time, there was a giant And I was reading the story and she put her hand, so I stopped reading. So she took her hand away and I started reading and then she put it back. And she said, how do you do that? How do you look there and the words come out your mouth? And there's a story in my head. Okay. So I said, it was a very hard question. I said, oh, it's reading. When you go to school, you will do that. And she said, I will get all the stories in the books. And I said, yes, all of them. But when she went to school, she couldn't decode. Do you know the phrase dyslexia? Okay. Sorry if I tell you that, and then I'll tell you next.
Pracovala jsem v knihovně a často jsem tam četla příběhy dětem. A byla tam jedna malá holčička, která pohádky přímo milovala. A já jsem vždy otevřela knížku a začala, jak se obvykle začíná, bylo, nebylo, kdy se žil jeden obr. A jí se to hrozně líbilo a často mi tam dala ruku na tu stránku, takže jsem přestala číst. Pak ji dala pryč a já jsem zase začala číst znovu. A udělala to takhle několikrát a ptala se mě, jak to děláš? Jak to děláš, že tam vidíš příběh a potom to měníš ve slova, která říkáš? A já mám jako své příběhy v hlavě. A já jsem jí vysvětlila, že to je čtení a že až půjde do školy, tak se to naučí také. Ona se mě zeptala, ona říkala, až se to naučím, tak si vezmu všechny ty příběhy, které jsou v téhle, ty pohádky, co jsou v té knížce. Akorát se to tady pak nestalo, protože měla dyslexii, takže nebyla schopná dekódovat ten smysl v těch slovech.
So I wanted to tell her story of how frustrating it would be, but I didn't have a story. I only had her situation. Okay.
Chtěla jsem tedy vyprávět její příběh o tom, jak frustrující to musí pro někoho být takováhle situace. Akorát jsem k tomu neměla žádný příběh, měla jsem prostě jen to prostředí.
And then one day in Kirkintilloch, they decided to build a ring road.
Mm-hmm.
So when they build a ring road, they take a line through the centre of the town and they knock down everything of interest. And they came to a graveyard, a very old graveyard.
No, jednoho dne v tom Kirkintillochu, v tom městě, kde jsem žila, tak se rozhodli, že udělají silnici skrz město, což znamenalo, že se na ně udělali velkou čáru na mapě a všechno, co bylo tam zajímavé, tak zbourali. A přišli při té stavbě k hřbitovu.
This is all true.
Tohle všechno se opravdu stalo.
So they opened, they had to move the bodies and they discovered a record that there had been plague victims in a mass grave.
Museli teda přenést všechna těla a zjistili, že tam byl hromadný hrob, společný hrob, ve kterém byly oběti moru.
So they were in a panic and they put a big wall round the graveyard and they flew experts in from the London School of Tropical Medicine. It was the most exciting thing that had ever happened in Kirkintilloch, ever.
Takže to dost vyděsilo, přece morové oběti, tak celý ten hřbitov obehnali obrovskou zdí a přivezli experty z Londýna z katedry tropických nemocí. Was it tropical diseases?
Yes. Yeah.
A byla to asi ta nejzajímavější věc, co se v tom městě za dlouhá léta stala.
So they dressed up, do you remember in E.T. where they had all the suits on, the breathing?
Takže vypadaly jako něco z E.T., měly takové na sebe ty kostýmy.
And they opened the grave, and inside the grave, now you tell me what they found. I need a volunteer.
A otevřeli hrob a v tom hrobu našli, a to mi teď musíte říct vy, nějaký dobrovolník.
What was in the grave?
Co bylo v hrobě?
Come on, anybody? See?
Nothing.
He said, that shows you that you're an adult and you have become boring.
Tak když někdo řeknete jakoby nic, tak to je vidět, že jste dospělí a že už to s vámi nuda.
Because if I ask this to a class of young people,
bych se zeptala třídy s malými dětmi.
They will say zombies, dinosaurs, werewolves. So I decided in my graveyard there would be something. But I realized I had the story because the graveyard, in Scotland especially, the gravestones are with codes and symbols.
Kdybych se totiž zeptala malých dětí, tak...
Sorry?
Jasně, so I have to speak more loud.
Okay.
Kdybych se zeptala malých dětí, tak by odpověděli, že tam budou zombie, nebo dinosauři, nebo vlkodlaci. A já jsem se teda rozhodla, že v mém hrobě tedy něco bude. A skotské hřbitovy vypadají trochu jinak než ty evropské, jsou vlastně plné různých nápisů a značek, znamení.
So you would get a graveyard with a horseshoe, it would be a blacksmith. A boat would be a sailor.
Takže pokud budete mít hrob, na kterém bude například podkova, bude to znamenat, že tam je pohřbený kovář. Když tam bude loď, tak tam asi spí námořník.
But some are secret codes that you have to work out, guild signs, etc.
A některé z nich jsou takové rébusy, jsou tajemné značky, které sami musíte přijít na to, co znamenají. A to například znamení cechů.
So my character in the book, who has dyslexia and can't read, runs away from school nearly every day and goes to the graveyard and he makes the stories up in his head.
Že ten hlavní hrdina té mé knihy, tak každý den utíká ze školy, vlastně ten, který má tu dyslexii, a tráví své dny na hřbitově a tam se snaží vymýšlet příběhy o těch znameních.
But the workmen come to build the road and there is something in the graveyard.
Nicméně dělníci přijdou postavit tu silnici a v tom hrobě něco je.
That's why it's called Whispers in the Graveyard.
Proto se to jmenuje Whispers in the Graveyard, šepot na hřbitově.
So it's sort of a haunting, a book about haunting, but it's also about the power of language.
Je to kniha o strašidlech, o strašení, ale také o síle řeči, jazyka.
Because the boy isn't stupid. I made it a boy because more often it is a boy who are challenge readers.
Je to vlastně ten hlavní hrdina, ta hlavní postava je chlapec, protože se častěji stává, že spíše chlapci mají problém s čtením, ale není hloupý.
And he thinks about, he knows that he's missing this, he knows he's missing the story, he knows this.
A ví, že mu ten příběh
Because
schází,
he's not stupid.
protože ví, není hloupý.
And so it kind of all comes together in the graveyard with whispering.
Takže to nakonec všechno jde dohromady, všechno se to spojí a na tom hřbitově, tam šeptání.
So that's Kirkintilloch.
To je to mé rodné město. Okay. So one boy wanted to ask a question.
Not sure.
It's a last question.
Oh. I'll be here around if you want to come and speak.
Ale já tady budu, když byste se chtěli dál ptát.
Já se chci zeptat, proč píšete zrovna čtení pro děti, proč ne třeba pro dospělé, co vás vlastně k tomu dostalo, proč to děláte, co vás na tom těší?
It sounds beautiful. I don't know what it is, but it sounds beautiful.
I would like to ask why you write books for children. Why not adults?
Because
what
they
makes you happy about it?
makes me very happy when I write books for children, for young people. Because young people, because I write for little, but adults are allowed to read them. I let them read them. This one, some of them, this and Nostradamus is published on adult lists in foreign languages, upside down. But you see, I worked in the library, and when you're young, you read like this. you read horror and hauntings and football and adventure and fantasy and science fiction and crime and romance and murder. Okay? Mm-hmm. And then when you grow up, you do this. And people come into the library and go, I just want the latest Stephen King. And you felt like saying, oh, go on, have a romance, blow your mind away. Try something different. But they don't. They go, no, I just want a crime novel. Whereas young people don't. It doesn't bother young people at all. If I write Alcatraz, Whispers in the Graveyard, Divided City about a Rangers fan, Celtic, 2 football fans, fairy tale book, Dream Master, fantasy, historical, they don't care. Okay, and I want to say something else as well.
Okay.
I'll do that first, and then I'll say also.
Tak psaní pro děti mi opravdu dělá radost a se píšu pro děti, ale samozřejmě to můžou číst i dospělí. Dovolím jim to, když chtějí. A například třeba Nostradamus, třeba ta první knížka, tak ta, když se překládá, nebo občas se objeví i na seznamech četby pro dospělé. Takže to vlastně můžou to číst všichni. A je to hlavně proto, že jsem pracovala v knihovně a když jste mladí, když jste malí, tak čtete tím způsobem, že čtete všechno okolo sebe. Takže třeba sci-fi, horory, romantické příběhy, příběhy o fotbale, detektivky a podobně. A jakmile zestárnete, tak se vám trochu zúží ten obzor. Takže pak dospělí lidé přijdou a řeknou, chci prostě posledního Kinga nebo chci thriller a člověk se jim snaží třeba dát nějakou romanci, ale nechtějí to, chtějí prostě to, pro co si přišli. A mladí to tak nemají, děti to tak prostě neřeší. Takže klidně můžu pro ně psát cokoliv budu chtít. Můžu psát o Alcatrazu, můžu psát o fotbale, to je ta Divided City, to je o městě rozděleném 2 fotbalovými fanoušky. Můžu psát fantasy, můžu psát horory a je to úplně jedno.
Also, young people tell you the truth. Adults will say, I said, you like the book, it was interesting. Young people will say, well, not really, the end could have been better. So you learn from them.
No a mladí lidé vám také řeknou do očí, co si o tom myslí, řeknou vám pravdu, že nebudou lhát, zeptáte se jich, jak se jim to líbilo a oni řeknou, no tak ten konec tam to mohlo být trošku jinak, takže se z toho člověk i poučí.
Remember, stories are the best ever. Your children will not remember when they go to bed if their pajamas were ironed or not, but they will remember if you told them a story.
Pamatujte, že pohádky jsou to nejdůležitější a vaše děti si nebudou pamatovat to, jestli měli vyžehlené pyžamo, když šli spát, ale to, jestli jste jim četli pohádku.
About legends, yes. These are legends, yes. Tales and legends. You have to go through the publisher, yeah, to the publisher. You'll get it in the book or on the internet. I don't understand what I'm being asked here.
Jenom jestli můžete předmět, jestli si rozumíme, jestli je možné poprosit o e-mailovou adresu a ještě jeden velký podpis na ty papíry.
Well, the question is if you may get your email address and 2 autographs on these papers.
Then he needs to go via the publisher for the email, which is on the internet or the book. Do I have time or do I need to go down?
We have to go down.
We have to. So I have to go down. Okay, so I have to go just into the cafe.
Jenom prostě opatrně níž, abychom tady uvolnili místo.
My handbag?
Yes, I got this.
Are you coming to?
Yes, of course.
All right, okay. Just make sure I've got it.